I show the climax of the action even before the story begins. The audience sees Kyle coming to that house with the gun and so on, all under the opening titles. Now, this I did because my conception of the film changed in the midst of shooting. I couldn't reshoot the scenes, but I could rearrange them. The continuity looked too regular for me, too linear. I decided to play against the tension of the story, which I always like to do. What can I say? As a director, you are building instinctively, almost musically at times. Those are words from director Sirk on his 1956 film, Written on the Wind. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer. And each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about Written on the Wind. So a quick synopsis of the film is, alcoholic playboy Kyle Hadley marries the woman secretly loved by his poor but hard-working best friend, who in turn is pursued by Kyle's sister. The tagline for the film is, this woman in his arms was now the wife of a man he called his best friend. The film stars Rock Hudson as Mitch Wayne, Lauren Bacall as Lucy Moore Hadley, Robert Stack as Kyle Hadley, Dorothy Malone as Mary Lee Hadley, and Robert Keith as Jasper Hadley. It's written by George Zuckerman, based on the novel by Robert Wilder, cinematography by Russell Meddy, directed by Douglas Sirk, edited by Russell F. Schoengarth, music by Frank Skinner, and costumes by Bill Thomas and J.A. Morley Jr. Today I have on Ben Turnbull, who is one of the co-hosts of the Franchisees podcast, and I'm very excited to have him on to talk about what is my favorite Sirk film, Written on the Wind, and I saw that you liked it a lot. So first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on. I'm very excited to have you on the show finally.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's very nice. My podcast co-host Alex on the Franchisees, he's always like, "Oh, you know all these film Twitter people, don't they have podcasts? Like, why don't you ask to be on their podcast?" And I never think to really reach out to anybody. Really nice that you asked, and I'm very happy to be here, and especially to talk about Written on the Wind, W on the W, as they say.
As they do say.
Detlef Sirk. I'm gonna do that. That's gonna be another bit. I have to say it like, some people are like, some film people are very precise about that sort of thing. Yeah. No, I'm not gonna do that.
I mean, you should. I've given in the series a bit of historical info on his life, but I don't think I've actually mentioned the fact that his name wasn't actually Douglas. So you're the first.
Yeah, but you can go even further too, because I think his first name is technically Hans. It's like Hans Detlef
Sirk.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, maybe that'll be a running bit. I'm trying to think about all the bits I'm going to do on the show.
I'm glad.
Because the Franchisees is a bit-based podcast more so than it is film discussion. That's another reason I'm happy to be on, because we do a lot of franchises, and it's not like a very original concept for a movie podcast. Nor does it result in us watching like a lot of particularly good movies. We try to do some good franchises every now and again, but a lot of time we're watching like junk. And so it's nice to talk about a really good movie instead.
No, I mean, hey, listen, franchises are a part of cinema and part of history.
It's
true. To be honest, so we can't get away from them. But I don't think it's an original concept. But I am curious. I'm glad that you brought it up. I am curious to hear for you to talk to the audience a bit about what franchises you have covered, or at least maybe your favorite ones that you've covered, and where we can find them.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, you can find the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all of the great companies we love so dearly. And pretty much everywhere you can find it. You can also just Google it, and another great company, and you should be able to find it there as well. As far as what franchises we've covered, like we did the Saw franchise. That was pretty big. We try to do one or two horror franchises a year. Right now in October, we're doing some mini horror franchises like Interview with the Vampire, Queen of the Damned. That's the most recent
Hmm.
right now. Yeah, but every now and again we try to do like a, kind of loose like franchise. So, for example, I listened to some episodes of this podcast, and I listened to some of the Bergman episodes because we did the, quote unquote Bergman like franchise, like Through a Glass Darkly, Winterlight, and
Oh, nice.
The Silence. Yeah. And so, I don't know if anybody listened to those episodes. Also, like, even though we're talking about serious movies, the episodes are still really stupid and silly. So I'm not sure, but we try to do that, something like that every now and again. Like we did Pasolini's Trilogy of Life.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. And are those franchises like by like the dictionary definition? Not really, but
I
it's
mean,
insane.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like with those like loose trilogies of some sorts, because I'm doing the series that's on right now.
Mhm.
It is Lars von Trier, and he did a lot of loose trilogies where it was like these
Yeah.
are not, it's not like the adaptation or a version of another film. It would be like Breaking the Waves, Dancer in the Dark, and whatever else.
Yeah.
They're not like sequels.
The fun, nice, normal movie trilogy.
Yeah, I would say, probably the Bergman trilogies, Pasolini's are those are dark too, but in different ways. I
Yeah.
don't think that Bergman's ever trying to ruin your day like Lars von Trier is, but
Yeah, I don't know either. Lars von Trier is like a little stinker, he's like he's a cheeky little bad boy. And Bergman I think is more substantial maybe. I like Lars von Trier too though. Um
I like both, but
uh,
it's different energies.
yeah, definitely. He's never gonna finish the Dogville Manderley
I know.
someone's got to one of his proteges has to Ruben Ostlund or are you
That's controversial.
a new provocateur has
Yeah, he might get some comments on that.
yeah,
Uh
awful. Not a fan. Not a fan.
I'm very curious to hear Douglas Sirk's what your relationship is to Douglas Sirk's work, especially outside of the film in question. Are you a fan of his? When did you start getting into his filmography?
Yes. So through the power and magic of Letterboxd, I can actually see because I have records that go back about 10 years or so, um, which is starting to kind of give me a lot of existential dread when I click on a movie to see if I have I seen it recently, and then you look back,
Mhm.
it's been like 10 years since you've seen it.
I know. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's creepy. Um, so I'm pretty sure the first Douglas Sirk movie I ever watched was Imitation of Life, and that was at a university course on American film. And we watched a lot of, I mean, from I guess the silent era to probably to like the 90s, like American indie era.
Mm.
And I think the teacher's name was Blaine Allen. Shout out if he's listening. You never know. Really great guy, really smart, showed us a lot of great movies. And yeah, that was definitely the first Cirque I had ever seen.
Okay.
Uh, I haven't seen it since then. So this is like a long time ago. Not to age myself, but quite a while, quite some time ago. And I think I've always meant to go back and watch the John Stahl version and and then the Cirque version to do a little comparison. Sometimes I'll give myself like little homework things to do, and then
Uh-huh.
that just prevents me from ever going back and seeing it because I'm like, oh, I got to see this first. I got to see this first. So yeah, it wouldn't have been until summer 2015 when I saw the next Cirque movie, and that was Magnificent Obsession at the Fifth Lightbox. with Guy Maddin introducing it. Uh,
Wow.
so I don't know why he was in town or whatever. Again, not to back in my day, but uh, I don't know how long you've been in. Were you around going to TIFF in like 2015, sort of?
My claim to fame is that when the TIFF Bell Lightbox opened, just before they opened it to the public, they allowed film students in, and I was the first
Yeah.
class to go in, and they
Oh,
showed us
okay.
Videodrome.
Oh,
So
okay.
yes, I've been
Cool.
around.
Yeah. Okay. You were there before I was. That's very cool. Um, so I'm sure you'll agree, like the programming used to be better. Yeah,
Yes.
there used to be more movies. It used to be more diverse. It used to be like they would mail you, if you remember, they'd mail you out like
Yep.
a poster, and you'd look at it
I
and
have them over there. I could
oh
see
yeah,
them.
the old
Yeah.
like back copies.
Yep.
Yeah, I look at them sometimes and I
Same.
a single tear.
R.I.P.
And you look through it and it's like there's 5 or 6 things a day that I
I
wanna
know.
um, so anyway, this was one of those things, and yeah, he gave an introduction, and he did a Q&A afterwards, about, Magnificent Obsession, about Douglas Sirk, and it
Wow.
was great, yeah. I think I asked a question or something, and I embarrassed myself. I felt like I asked a stupid question, so then I went up to him afterwards and was like, "Oh, I love your work and I love my Winnipeg
Uh-huh.
and blah, blah. I'm from Saskatoon and it's kind of the same thing and blah, blah, blah." And he was really nice.
Aw,
So
that's
yeah,
good.
cool guy. Um, and I think that movie of the Cirque I've seen is the most absurd in a lot of ways. It be the campiest and maybe, and this is something I'm sure we'll talk about coming up, but the audience's relationship to these movies, to melodrama, but especially to like Circean melodrama, is
Uh-huh.
is often this like I don't know, kind of a push pull between wanting to like take the emotions very seriously and or to like laugh at them because you're uncomfortable or because they're so broad or whatever. So like this screening, I remember there was a lot of laughter, and it didn't feel like the ironic rep screen laughter that we all hate today, where it's like,
Yes.
okay, stop like laughing at the movie just because like you don't, like how people laugh at Lynch movies or whatever else. And we can talk about that too, because I think he's also a big,
Yes.
yes, Sirkian filmmaker as well. So then let me see. Then in the same year, later in 2015, I would have watched All That Heaven Allows for the first
Uh-huh.
time, which I think is in many ways the best, or maybe one of the two best, along with Written on the Wind, that people would often cite as like their favorite, or the one that affected them the most. And I would agree with that. I think it's but I'm starting to come around that this one's the best, Written on the Wind, because All That Heaven Allows, I think, is just like very sad, and the emotions, the big emotions in that movie, I think make you cry. Whereas in this movie, it's a lot more complicated. Like this movie, I don't find this movie sad in the same way. And so I think maybe that's what All That Heaven Allows gets the edge for some people, because there's a more clear, like direct emotional response that it would elicit. Anyway, many years pass. And then in 2023, I saw There's Always Tomorrow.
Mm. That's
Love
great.
as well.
That's
Yeah.
great.
The next year, so I only saw Written on the Wind in 2024, again at the Lightbox. I'm not sure who introduced it. It wasn't Guy Maddin. It was like, like someone less famous.
That's so funny because I also saw it on the Wind at the Lightbox, but it was before that. It was like in
Oh,
2017, and I knew Cirque at that point.
yeah.
I had seen All the Heaven Allows in school. I had seen Magnificent Session at some point and Imitation of Life, but I wasn't like a Cirque head that I am now. I just back in the day, like you said, TIFF's programming was significantly better, and my life was changed. It's great seeing this, and I'm sure seeing this on a big screen.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Phenomenal. There was no introduction. They were just, I don't know what series it was part of, but they were just playing it. But from then on, after I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. I need to be actively looking at who Douglas Sirk is, and then started watching a lot of his other stuff. I am excited to talk about Written on the Wind. And a lot of the points that you brought up in your introduction of how you got into his work are super relevant to this film.
Mhm.
So I'm excited for the conversation because I think we have probably the same mindset on it. To start off with just the segment one and the personal thoughts, like I've already said this is my favorite. You said this is one of your favorites, at least, of his films. And I
Yeah.
think I read his biography by Jon Halliday, which is the only book on Cirque that exists because people don't
Really?
really. It's
That's
weird.
crazy.
It's actually insane, and I hope
Yeah.
that now because he's getting to be more of a thing as the years go by, that someone else, and maybe it has to be me who writes a
You
book on
should. You
Cirque
should.
at this point.
Yeah.
But Jon Halliday was just like a huge nerd and loved his work and managed to get Cirque at the time before he passed. At this point, he was already retired, but he got him and interviewed him. So there's a lot of interviews of Cirque just talking about his work, and it's so fascinating. It's a summarily like small enough book, but it's hard to find. Oddly enough, so when we finally got a copy, I just went through it, and it's been my Bible for this series. He talks a lot about how the concept of melodrama, and it's hard not to talk about melodrama when you talk about his work. And I've talked about it with all four guests, including yourself, for this series, and what their thoughts are on melodrama, because we all know that melodrama has an unfortunate negative connotation. People are like, Melodrama means it's bad." I'm the opposite, where I'm like, if you tell me something is melodramatic, I'm on top of it and I immediately want to watch it. But melodrama for certain directors and the way it's attached is different. When I'm looking at the poster right behind you, Mulholland Drive, that's a melodrama. That's David Lynch. People
100%.
respect David Lynch's melodrama, despite the fact that he is so heavily influenced by Cirque.
Yes.
Um,
Big time.
but then they Circean melodrama, depending on who you are, it's either your cup of tea or it's not, which is fair. But
Mhm.
I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the concept of melodrama in cinema and why a lot of people turn their noses up to it, and why Cirque's melodrama works for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think melodrama has this like stigma attached to it because it's used as a negative descriptor of something rather than as like a style or intentional like mode that the film would be in. And I'm just thinking about growing up and like all the little received wisdoms you get from like your parents or friends or even like message boards or wherever else, where somebody
Mhm.
says, "Oh, this movie is really melodramatic," and they mean it in like a bad way. I When I was growing up, I would think, okay, melodrama equals sappy, Oscar bait, or like maudlin, weepy movies, for your mom or something. There's also this gendered element to it, I think, as well. And then when you start watching, you're totally right because it depends on what filmmaker you're talking about. People will talk about David Lynch, and they'll talk about something being Lynchian, and often not even use the word melodrama, because they think it's like this like I don't know, sui generis, if I'm saying that right, sort of thing. It's like Lynch just kind of made this Lynchian style fully formed out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
Or so and so, and that's something I think that just sort of happens naturally for a lot of people getting into movies. Is you get into like, for example, you get into like your Tarantino when you're a kid or something, right? And you're like,
Uh-huh.
wow, this is so original. And then, eventually, as you broaden your horizons, you realize, like, obviously, that's an extreme example of like pastiche, right? But you realize where these influences come from and where the ground floor is laid, right? Um, and you think about, or like, Todd Haynes, right? Obviously,
Uh-huh.
is a pretty, or John Waters or Pedro Almodovar, or like Fassbender earlier than that, obviously.
No.
All can be kind of linked back to the specific Sirkian melodrama. And then people, even there's filmmakers at that same time too who are working in their own different modes of melodrama, like I guess Minnelli and Nicholas Ray.
Yes.
I think about a lot. Something you watch something like Rebel Without a Cause, uh,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that is one of the most melodramatic, over the top, huge,
Yes.
big emotions leaking out on the screen. Like vivid colors, and that's like absolutely the same kind of Sirkian thing, I think. But maybe the reason that something like that gets embraced more, I mean, obviously Cirque is everyone loves Cirque now, but I don't know if that was the case. But part of that is that sort of gendered aspect to it, where it's like Cirque made, quote unquote women's pictures, and women's pictures are melodramatic weepies, and they don't contain the kind of plot points or characters or feelings that are more associated with, like, I guess, a masculine cinema, or
Hmm.
like maybe even a gender neutral cinema. So I think that's also maybe part of it, that there's this, and then the other thing too is that melodrama is associated with, like, the soap opera, which again is
Hmm.
often something used as a description, a negative description, rather than talked about as like a genre unto itself, where someone will say, "Oh, well, this is too soapy," or this is too whatever. And I don't like. I'll be honest, I haven't really seen very many soap operas. Although I would say something like Twin Peaks is obviously working in that mode as
Hmm.
well. I think that's another thing that another sort of like negative descriptor people would apply to that. But what makes Cirque's melodrama so interesting to me is that it feels like, even if it obviously is building on other things as well, it feels like this sort of like source code for all of this stuff that I love so much, and the emotions in his movies are so over the top, but not in a way that feels like cheap, or like like it's trying to or forced, I guess is the word.
Hmm.
It feels very genuine. And even though a lot of these movies I think are intentionally funny and intentionally ironic, and that's why they're so interesting, that's why they work, the emotions are still real. Like Written on the Wind, and I did rewatch it a couple times for over the past couple weeks, just to kind of familiarize myself with it again. There's some stuff in this that is so funny and so heavily ironic, and almost to the point of being silly. And I remember laughing in the
Hmm.
audience when I saw it in the theater. Um, but within the same scene, even, or maybe another scene later, there's an emotion so raw and so real that you feel like crying. And that is such a fine line to walk, that is, I think, so tonally difficult for filmmakers to achieve and to maintain. And that when they do, they become great filmmakers, like Lynch, or like John Waters, for example. And when they don't, then it becomes, well, this is melodramatic, this is soap opera, this
Hmm.
is whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much that you said that um I 100% agree with, and it's already in my notes, so we'll 100% expand on it. So I'm glad that you brought them up. One of the first things I want to touch upon is the concept of, just kind of touch upon it before we move on, how these were considered women's pictures or weepies. And it's interesting which directors ended up pioneering his films and now making them to what we see today, because Cirque was not popular in the day. Rock Hudson was popular in the day, and people were going to see Rock Hudson pictures. They weren't going to see Douglas Sirk pictures. Nowadays, you would be like, I want to see a Douglas Sirk movie. And you also want to see Rock Hudson, because who doesn't?
He's so great in these.
He is.
Yeah.
And so is all of his other players, like Dorothy Malone's great, Robert Stack's great, Jane Wyman's great.
Hmm.
Um, but at the time, he was not popular. So it's interesting. All the directors you mentioned are his biggest pioneers. So we got Todd Haynes, John Waters, Fassbinder, and Lynch. I
Mhm,
want to focus on the other three in the concept of these are all three queer directors and filmmakers
mhm,
who ended up pioneering and really pushing the fact that, hey, these are films that are heavily inspired by Sirk, and they're not trying to hide it. They're actually being like, I'm telling you this because I want you to go watch the source material.
mhm,
Especially Fassbinder being the very first of them, who did direct essentially adaptations of his work, especially with like Ali Fear It's a Soul is like a direct adaptation of All That Heaven Allows.
mhm.
So it's interesting that queer cinema ended up pioneering this, and that's how now today we're getting retrospectives or people even like Criterion being like, "Hey, this is a series on Douglas Sirk." So I think it's interesting that Sirk not being a queer director, but still was adept to it, and there are still queer elements to his films. So there's two that I've mentioned in the previous series. Rock Hudson's the obvious one.
Mhm.
At the time, obviously, he was closeted. Now we know that he was a gay man who was with men. And within the industry, people knew, but the audience, the viewers didn't know. And that's just because even still today, there's still an element of you need to kind of keep that part of your life out of it if you want to get the roles that you're getting. And he's getting leading man roles.
Yeah.
And then Cirque's major producer, the producer that he was worked with a lot in all the big pictures, Ross Hunter, was also a gay man.
Right.
And he pushed the idea of women's pictures and targeting women and trying to make films that were for women. But Cirque's influence was not that he wasn't on top of that. He was just like, we can do that, but let's do it in a way that's not making fun of the genre. And I think it's exactly what he says. Like, it could be something that seems like it's poking fun of and it's actively trying to be a joke. Whereas, like, this is very serious, but also understanding that there is humor,
Mhm,
which is such a hard balance that so many people have not been able to do post that,
mhm.
except for maybe I think the latest one would be like a David Lynch, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think Todd Haynes does a really good job too. I mean, even,
Mhm,
like May December, for example, recently, I think is really walks that line and does a really good job because that movie, especially with its use of the score and the stings from the Joseph Losey the Go Between, right? Where this huge dramatic music will come in, when Julianne Moore is like, "We need more hot dogs" or whatever, and but then you have these scenes with the oh, what's his name? The Charles Melton character that are so sad and so like affecting, that is the one of the more recent like Sirkian melodramas I thought was really well done, but it's also like very much a modern film too, and has a modern
mhm,
sensibility and is a little bit more knowingly camp and knowingly funny. But, and speaking of that, the one of the other I did watch Far From Heaven as well,
mhm.
which I'd never seen before, which is like, take obviously All That Heaven Allows, a
Yep.
little bit of Written on the Wind, a little bit of Imitation of Life, and also like a little bit of the Fassbender versions of those movies as well. And, I liked it. I thought it was interesting, but
Mhm,
didn't quite hit the same spot as far as like basically what is basically a remake of like a Cirque movie as like Ali Fears the Soul or some of the other Fassbender ones. But it's still like a very well done sort of version of this. It was just weird watching it because I also rewatched All That Heaven Allows, and it was weird watching Far From Heaven right after that because it's like it's almost the exact same thing. It kind of made me go a little crazy. Like maybe you're not supposed to have watched them within 24 or 48 hours or whatever.
mm.
Um, And then, oh yeah, I've also seen Lured, uh,
Mhm.
and I've seen Tarnished Angels, and then oh yeah, and then the past couple of weeks I watched Battle Hymn and A Time to Love, Time to Die.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to bring those up at some point. But
Battle Hymn, I actually will bring up both. Battle Hymn specifically, but A Time to Live and Time to Die will be relevant in terms of Battle Hymn. It's always interesting to see the films that he inspired,
mhm,
especially now because he is a name, but not knowing at the time because I'm sure when Far From Heaven came out, which I don't even know. I didn't see it when it came out. I saw it like a maybe 4 years ago for the first time. Knowing that it existed, but just never got around to it. But I'm sure at the time people weren't like, "Oh, this is a Cirque film," except for people who
oh,
knew.
yeah, probably not the average,
Most people,
no, or
100%.
the average Oscar voter too. I know that was a big Oscar movie at the time.
There's something you mentioned though in your intro about Written on the Wind specifically
Mhm,
and the music. So Frank Skinner was the composer, and he composed a lot of Cirque's films, especially all of the major ones that he did. And the music in this film is very interesting, I find, because it's amping it up. It's amping up the emotions and the drama in a way that's different from something like All the Heaven Allows or Magnificent Obsession. But I think what's the strength of Frank Skinner's work is that still, even though he's amping it up purposefully, I still don't think he's pushing the audience to be like, this is how you feel. He's like, let's feel this together
mhm,
and amp it up. Um, I think there are a lot of great scenes that involve music, even if it's not necessarily his score. I'm thinking of two scenes in particular, one that his score and one that's not.
mhm.
One is the opening scene, which is probably one of my favorite opening scenes in a movie ever, just because I love high tension, high drama like this, where it opens up with the scene is essentially it's not the end of the film, but it's towards the end. And I think and I'd love to hear your thoughts on opening up the film like that with a scene that we're gonna see again later, but it pushes us right into it. And the music's a lot. It's just getting us into, hey, this is not gonna be a chill time. It's
Yeah.
gonna be a lot of emotions, and I'm gonna push you into it. And then the other scene, because we talk about the film, that this is a not a spoiler-free, podcast. I assume that if you're listening, you've watched the film. The scene where Dorothy Malone's character, Mary Lee, is dancing after she gets home from being taken home from the cops, and her dad happens to die on the stairs at the same
Yes.
time. So, if we talk about the first one, just the opening scene, what are your thoughts on the music, how it's used, but also just opening the film that way?
Opening like in media res is really interesting for this movie. Sometimes it feels like a gimmick in other movies. Like
Mhm,
it's like, all right, gotta hook them right away. And if you don't show them that there's gonna be, like something dramatic, like a murder or whatever, then they're gonna lose interest. But in this case, it just it's such an emotionally intense movie that it feels very appropriate to open it with basically the climax of the film emotionally, but to leave all these details out. You don't know who any of these people are, uh,
mhm,
and you don't know what the stakes are or their relationships are. And even when he's like peeling around the city in his car, drunk driving, he's going by all of in the yeah, he's going by all of these Hadley oil signs and like buildings and everything, and you don't even know who he is yet, right? And I think it just really sets up that character well, that and I Robert Stack is like incredible in this movie.
yeah,
Yeah, and if you, the listener, have only know him from like something like Airplane, which he's also very good in, or like Unsolved Mysteries or whatever,
mhm,
you go back to this or like Tarnished Angels, and like he is really, really incredible in this. I know he was up for an Oscar for this, and maybe should have won. I haven't seen who's is the guy in. Lust for Life, right? I haven't seen that movie.
Oh, Anthony Quinn.
Yeah.
Anthony, uh,
Maybe
I'm
is
a
he?
huge Anthony Quinn head, so
Yeah.
it's hard for me to say
Yeah.
who should have won. Anthony Quinn could have won for any other role, to be honest, but he
Yeah.
was good in that.
This is like the Robert Stack performance, I
It
think.
is. It's
Um,
top.
yeah, he's so good in it. And to start the film with that character careening around the town, the city or whatever that his family owns, drunk driving in his like yellow Ferrari or whatever it is. I think just completely sets up who that guy is, and you're not introduced to him until you're introduced to the other two main characters. So that having that introduction for him, I think, is very important, setting up that sort of volatility that is
Hmm.
essential to who he is, and that will eventually be his undoing. Um, and to catch that glimpse of that, and to know that he is basically marked for death by the movie itself.
Audiences' receptions of the film, because I 100% agree, um, and how people receive earnestness, I think. I think that's
Yes.
maybe the best way of talking about it. It's like it is. I think the Sirk's films are very earnest.
If I ever introduced a movie or like programmed something, I would, and it was something like this. You almost feel like you have to kind of mention that,
Yeah,
like, listen, like, not everybody here is necessarily a cinephile who watches a disgusting, desperate
I
cinephile
know.
who watches 5 movies a day or whatever. You have to understand this movie is working and operating in this specific mode. you know, you're gonna have an uncomfortable time watching it. Like, Written on
Hmm.
the Wind is an uncomfortable movie a lot of the time because awful things happen in it. Very dramatic, very painful things happen. Um, and you know, you it provokes this response in you, this emotional response that can be very difficult to sort of handle or sort of place in your emotions. Like, how am I supposed to react to this? And especially from scene to scene,
Hmm.
things can change. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess, there's a lot of specific things I'd like to talk about, I guess. Is that an okay time to talk about some of those things? Like
Yeah, please,
some
please
of
do.
the instances, like, um, okay, where do I even start? Well, one of the things you were talking about is, sort of some of the queer subtext to the movie, uh,
Yes.
and then also how, like, some of Sirk's, like, key, fans and imitators and, proteges, and not maybe not protege in a literal sense, but, we're queer filmmakers as well. Um,
Hmm.
and, I think, trying to think of the rest of his movies, like, yes, there's all the movies he made with Rock Hudson, there is that metatextual element to them that we, the audience 2025 can enjoy. Um, and, I don't wanna put too much weight on that because, like, that is, outside of the world of the film.
Hmm.
But it does, sort of, lend the films to queer readings a little bit more. And I think
For
more
sure.
more than any of his other movies, I think this is the one that has the most, like, upfront kinda queer reading to it. Like, that the relationship between Mitch and Kyle, uh, is so intense. And, like, on the surface, yes, it's really just like, I have a rich friend who's fucking crazy and who I hate a lot of the time, but I love him like a brother. And I think, maybe not necessarily the rich part of it, but I think we all sort of have a friend who we feel this almost familial bond to, but who is, like,
Hmm.
difficult to be around and makes your life harder. But
Yeah.
you can't just, like, cut them out of your life because
Hmm.
they mean so much to you. But there is a kind of, whatever, if not, like, necessarily explicitly homosexual, like a homosocial kind of, bond or interaction between these two. like when he's like when Mitch is on the plane waiting for them, he's like Kyle says to him, "I can't shake you," and Mitch goes, "It goes both ways." And then there's also not long after that when he's talking to Lucy, the Lauren Bacall character, and he's like, "I'm talking to you like I've never talked to anyone before, not even Mitch." And I love that part too.
Yeah.
It's such a romantic film, like, and maybe the most romantic element for me is their friendship. It goes back to when they were boys, when they were, these formative years of their relationship, and you don't see these flashbacks, but you do hear little moments, in dialogue reference to it, and it seems like they were always like connected in this very profound way, even
Hmm.
if as they grew up, Kyle's drinking and his kind of rich playboy attitude, you know, brought them apart. I don't know. Is there any other moments for you that
I think it's so interesting that Mitch views Mary Lee specifically as a sister, and I don't think he's
right?
wrong for
Yeah.
that, because he did grow up as like kind of he was the additional third sibling. But it's interesting that he keeps referring to her as like, "Oh, you're like my sister," as opposed to like we're just friends and friend zoning. He's like sibling zoning her, which
Yes.
is even a higher degree of like I want nothing to do with you that way, which is fair. But his interest for Lucy, Lauren Bacall's character, doesn't even feel sexual. Sometimes it
No.
can read as like, I'm just jealous that you're there. And if I can't have him, then I'll take you away from him in a sort of way where I'm like, well, maybe if
Yeah.
I show an interest, then something will break and you guys will just not be together and you'll have to remove yourself from the equation.
Totally. Like his romantic relationship with Lucy is maybe the least romantic and the least sexual of any of the relationships, because
Yes.
he has this like sort of unspoken, like, psychosexual bond with Kyle, and then this complete, like, I am not interested in you at all relationship with Mary Lee, and she's throwing herself at him constantly, and that is also part of the metatextual element of Rock Hudson, where it's like,
Mhm.
woman is, like, falling all over him, and he's like, "I'm not interested." He's like,
I know.
"I'm sorry, we can't talk about it, but I'm not interested." One of those great scenes in the movie that is again an example of really walking the line between absurd and funny and heartbreaking is this very kind of strange scene where Mary Lee, after she's introduced and after their relationship is introduced, she goes, to the old swimming hole or whatever, like this old pond where they used to
Yeah.
skinny dip. And that's when she fell in love with like adolescent Mitch, right?
Yep.
Um, and you hear their childhood voices in her
I
head,
know.
and she's reacting. She's got these big reactions, like, and it's like, when we grow up, you'll marry me, right, Kyle? And he's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, you love me, don't you, Kyle? And he's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the camera pans over, like as she's sort of, reacting and kind of like
Yeah.
feeling sad. It pans over to this tree where their initials are carved, and there's big music sting, and it's like, that's one of those great moments where it is so funny and so over the top, but you actually really feel bad for her because
I know.
I think everyone has had a situation, maybe not quite as extreme as hers, but a situation of unrequited love or
Mhm.
whatever, or a friend that you have feelings for.
I think what's interesting is, which kind of relates to my next talking point that I had of this is, released in the 50s, 56. And if you're familiar with old Hollywood films, if you're familiar with older films, a Hays Code was still a thing, but we're on the tail end of it. So it's not fully out of the picture, but studios are just saying, "Fuck it, I don't really care," and they're really looking for projects that'll push boundaries to a certain extent. So, Universal, which released this picture and released a lot of the well, I mean, definitely all of the Cirque pictures that we know, but released this one. They were specifically looking for a story that was going to push boundaries to some sort of extent. Um, and they picked this this story, which was a based on a novel by Robert Wilder.
Mhm.
And when you're watching the film, despite the fact that we're part of a modern audience who has seen much more salacious stories, but if you are putting yourself in the mindset of people who are watching at the time, there's certain things that are said that even I was like, "Oh, wow, they're talking about her sleeping around and
Yeah.
how she's just doing this because she wants to, and how Mary Lee does it and doesn't care about it. She just thinks of it as a joke, and obviously she's doing it too. The story's sort of framing it as her punishing her father, but I also think she's just like, I am punishing myself, Mitch, and also I just don't care and I like doing it. And that's something that one we still don't really get that often in film, but especially in 1956, you're not getting that. And some of the language used to describe her is not something that you would get in films. So it's interesting that they wanted to do this project, but they specifically wanted Cirque to do it because they're like, you're gonna show it, but you're gonna do it in a classy way, which I think is true. Like he's not treating her as trash. I think he's kind of I don't know if empowering is the best word, but I don't think he's judging her. He understands where she's coming from and is just letting the audience think as they may without placing his own judgments or placing any sort of Hollywood judgments on her. As a modern audience viewer, I'm wondering how you feel about that. Cirque's because I haven't read the book,
Yeah.
truthfully. Didn't know it was a book, to be honest, until I started doing research for this. So I don't know that I'll get around to the book. So I don't know how Mary Lee was portrayed in the book, but from knowing Cirque and doing research on him, I know that he did this very purposefully, and I think he did it with love in his heart. I'm wondering how you feel about her character because she is, I think, the most progressive in a way, especially for film of the time.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I wouldn't say it's like like a properly like feminist character
Yeah.
or portrayal, but for the standards of the time, like, and especially considering something like the Hays Code where characters who had this like licentious behavior had to be punished and had to be
Mhm.
corrected and whatever. And like, her character is in some ways like punished for her behavior, like like when the dad dies and like her brother gets killed and like her behavior, not so much necessarily her promiscuity but her lies, have very serious consequences, like when she fabricates this, because of her own jealousy, this extramarital affair that she thinks maybe
Yeah.
Lucy might be having. She tells Kyle, and that sets into motion the end of the movie where he gets killed. Lucy has a miscarriage, like all this awful stuff, right? But I do think that Cirque respects her character and if not respect, treats her as like a human being. Because
Mhm.
and I know that book is also based on like a real life murder case, right? I'm not sure exactly what the details were, but it was something similar, like a rich playboy son of a, you know, whoever, like rich guy was killed in like dubious circumstances. And I think in the real life they were like it was like tobacco industry people instead of oil. They changed it to
Okay.
oil to yeah. Um, but Mary Lee, you know, the movie treats all of the characters and her and Kyle as well, in particular, with a great degree of empathy, I think. They're pretty awful people. They do awful
Uh-huh.
things, but they have these vices, I guess, in particular Kyle's drinking, which is treated with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of compassion. And I think other films, I could absolutely see the Mary Lee character being like, brushed off as like a tramp or something, to use an old, that moral decay at the center of her promiscuity is like indicative of the rot in this whole family and everything. But I don't think that Sirk is necessarily doing that. I think the family, like, this is a critique of like the American family in a lot of ways, and a critique of capitalism, and that you have this family that is wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams, and basically like owns and runs their own town. And what has that resulted in for the children? It's ruined their lives, basically. That this degree of privilege that capitalism has afforded them has not made them better people. and
Uh-huh.
and not just that they're acting out in whatever ways, whether it's like drinking or sleeping around or whatever it is. It's that they're both sad. They're depressed, and they have no way to deal with it other than to self-destruct. And I think Cirque brings a lot of compassion to that. They're the most interesting characters. Not that Lucy and Mitch aren't interesting, but these flawed characters are treated as real people, not just as
Yes.
stereotypes as well. And it's really genuinely sad. Like where they end up, like there's so much Robert Stack drunk acting in this, and like, yeah, it's, I laugh a little bit at it. Some of it's funny, but it's really, really sad, I think. He's so good at that, and it feels real. And then Mary Lee, similarly, the way that her kind of performative nature, that is this mask for how empty she feels, is really sad. Like
Uh-huh.
even in the moment when she comes back from getting arrested and puts on the record, and she's dancing, like, and she seems joyful, but that it's not out of joy. It's just very sad. And how she's completely fixated um her life around her love of Mitch, which will never happen. Um, and and because it will never happen, she as is basically closing herself off to any type of meaningful relationship. So the only relationships she has are transactional, one night
Uh-huh.
stands or whatever. It's just very sad.
I know.
Yeah.
I
Without
find
without being judgmental, I think, for the most part.
I think exactly that. I don't think the film is judging her on it. It's just portraying her as a matter of fact. And I think that's the best thing you can do for those characters. And I agree. Not that Mitch and Lucy aren't interesting. It's just that they are playing the straight characters to
Yeah.
two very crazy characters. You can't have all four being over the top because then it actually ends up being way too much.
Right.
So you need counteracting characters for those two. Not that I want to spend too much time on it, but I am curious. As you were talking, it reminded me of a point with the Hadley family. I find it interesting, and again, having not read the book, I find it interesting that both kids don't spend too much time on screen with their dad. Kyle, we get a couple scenes, but I don't think Mary Lee gets a scene at all with her dad.
No.
Like she's maybe in the same room or like there's a party where he happens to be, but they don't interact at all. And I think it's interesting that like he's portrayed the dad as a nice and sound enough man, but we there is an underlying sort of, I don't know, not evil, but like something that you have to be some sort of level of evil to be an oil tycoon and own
Yes.
a town essentially. He's
Yes.
just calmed down over the years, but he also, the wife and the mother obviously passed. I don't know how old when the kids were. I can't remember. But he didn't raise those kids. He was just
No.
there.
Sure.
Obviously, someone else raised them.
Sure.
So there's a distance between them, and you feel that distance. Kyle is obviously trying hard to get his dad's approval and hates that Mitch is the preferred son, even though he's not his blood son, despite the fact that Papa Hadley would much prefer him as a son.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then Mary Lee pretends like she doesn't care about her dad at all, but obviously does because that's your parent, and you live. Both of them are adults who live with their parents. So, I mean, respect. That's a big ass house. Why wouldn't you live there?
Oh,
Um, but I think it's interesting that the film actively shows us that there's a distance between all three of these people, and there's a tension between the three. Um, and who ultimately ends up the only person alive is Marilee
right.
at the end,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
interesting.
Um, yeah, well, I want to talk about the end, but maybe in a bit, because that is also one of those really funny, ironic images too. Well, whatever. I'll just talk about it now. Like
Hmm,
when she ends up the only member of her family alive, and Mitch and Lucy are driving off to their new life happily ever after in Iran, which is also funny. I guess
yeah,
oil, I guess. I mean, and uh, and then um, and then Mary Lee is sitting in her dad's office, stroking the phallic oil well. I
yep,
mean, like talk about something that probably wasn't an issue with the Hays Code because
yeah,
probably wouldn't have registered. And I don't know to what degree, Sirk, like, I think Sirk obviously is very intelligent and knows when he's doing something funny or doing something that is loaded with
hmm,
or irony. But like that is a crazy way to end the movie. I don't
it is.
necessarily know exactly what to say about it, but that I guess she is now like all of the phallocentric power in the family is gone, and now she is there stroking off the oil well.
Hmm.
I don't really know what to say.
All I know is that Cirque wanted to end it there. He
Mm,
didn't want the Mitch and Lucy driving off scene. That was
oh,
not part of the plan. But the studio and the producer was like, well, we need to give a happier ending because it can't end on the character that people in their minds hate. Because I think Marilee is supposed to be not an outright villain, but like she did try and get Mitch imprisoned for a crime that we all know he didn't do.
yes,
Um,
yes,
so they added that in. I know specifically also Hudson's agent was like, we need to have an happier ending. Cirque, just to give a bit of background to the listeners, Cirque usually, especially for his more Hollywood films, the ending always got interference by the studio, and they always were like, let's change it. So even like without giving too much away for people who might not have seen the other ones, All That Heaven Allows and Magnificent Obsession, they're like, you gotta change that ending that you've planned because we don't agree with. Sirk usually preferred like a more realistic or a darker ending, so he wanted to just end it on Merrily
that's awesome.
alone, which is the better ending.
It also is essentially the ending, because after doing that, I would say there's probably 10 seconds or like 30 seconds more of just them driving off. It's essentially the ending. Like,
Exactly. He was like, I'll do what you say, but I'm not going to do it the way you want. Like, I'm not going to fully compromise who I am as an artist to do it. I'll give you what you want that's enough for you to be like, fine, I'll sign off on it.
well, there's another one of my favorite scenes I wanted to talk about as well, which again is also hilarious and sad. and I do want to just be clear to the listener. I'm not saying these are like so funny, so silly. I want you to understand, like, this is the key to this movie and to melodrama and to Sirk and to all the other directors we've talked about, is that to me, like, cinematic, the crafting of like a cinematic tone is so important, maybe more than anything else in a movie, that if you can get a tone right, and keep it consistent. And consistent doesn't mean that it can't shift. It just has to make thematic and tonal sense within the film. If you can do that and create these moments that are huge emotionally, and still have them not like disrupt the film, that is what I'm looking for a lot of the time, especially in old Hollywood and in melodrama. And so, for example, when Robert Stack goes to the restaurant to talk with the doctor, and the doctor is basically saying he has like a low sperm count or something. But the way that the
Uh-huh.
doctor says it is, there's a weakness. Like, it's so serious, right? He's like, I don't know how to put this, but there's a weakness. And it's like it cuts right to Robert Stack's soul, because
Yeah.
he is this wounded like man child, right? Um,
Mhm.
it's playboy, not play man, right? He's this
Yep.
like little boy who is again performing this masculine sort of identity, and that is completely shattered in that moment. And then he gets up, and without even like finishing the conversation with the doctor, he just stands up, looks like he's completely dazed, and stumbles out of the restaurant. And he goes and he sees right outside of the restaurant, there's a little boy riding a mechanical horse up and down. And it's so funny. I every single time, and in the theater especially, people like were being respectful, but could not help but laugh, right? It is so funny and such a loaded image and like so ridiculous. Um, but it works so well. And it is really sad, because that at this moment in the film, he's been married to Lucy for like over a year or something, and he's been
Mhm.
sober, which is his main kind of issue. And he seems to be doing really well, and the relationship seems to be good, and it seems to have Lucy has seemed to have like helped him improve as a person. And
Yep.
you know that in this moment it's all lost, and he's going to go right back to drinking, and this is the beginning of the end, basically. And of course you've seen the end at the beginning,
Yep.
when he gets killed, so like this is the moment where everything is going to fall apart. um and I mean, that is just a perfect like scene. Uh, um, and I think indicative of a lot of what makes Cirque so great, because you can see that scene in another movie being absolutely like ridiculous.
I always forget about the second part of that scene. Like, I always remember him sitting down with the doctor, but I always forget about the kid. So anytime I've watched it, it's funny because this is the second time I watched it this year, because I watched it for a film club I'm part of. In the hands of another director who is again not an earnest artist, it would have been played for laughs. But I also think, like you said, Cirque sees the humor in such imagery. And it's funny because I read an interview with him. The interviewer grilled him on the scene. And I say grill in the sense
Oh,
that he just kind of asked him specifically, there's no way you didn't do that on purpose. And he's like, actually, we just saw that the horse would happen to be outside of that store. And we took a kid, I probably was someone's kid who worked on set, and we're like,
yeah.
sit on this. He claims that it was not purposeful, and he stood by it, and the interviewer was like, I don't know if I believe that." But Sirk was just like, "No, I just did that because we were like, why not have a kid?" And he's like, "But you put so much emphasis on that scene."
Well, I think if to be the kind of director he is, you do, I think, sort of have to maintain a bit of that distance,
Yep.
and a bit of that ambiguity, like, for example, Lynch does in all of his interviews, right?
Mhm.
I think that is important. you don't want to be too like expository when you talk about your own work and what it means. And whether or not that's actually true, uh,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter because he chose to do it, and they did put emphasis on it, and it's part of the movie. So
Uh-huh.
it doesn't matter whether or not to what degree it was planned out, or if it was in the script, or if it was on the day, or whatever. Like it's there, right?
It was purposely put there, no matter whether, like you said, it was just done on the day or whatnot. So I think that's like a lot of imagery in his films. Some of it from reading again through just interviews with him, which is always interesting to actually read interviews from the artists and their interpretation because a lot of directors, especially when they're looking back on work that was like, oh, this I made this like 30, 40 years ago, they're like, it wasn't a big deal.
Right.
Meanwhile, like, the interviewer is just, like, gushing over that would be me, and I'd be like, but, like, I spent my whole life thinking about this scene, and you're just telling me it means nothing."
Yeah. Yeah, I love reading stuff like that.
So, it's always interesting that he just is, like, kinda nonchalant, but then, like, there's certain scenes that he's like, "Oh, I purposefully put, like, some sort of meaning or a metaphor behind that," and, like, no one would ever think anything of it. So it's always interesting, but there's so much that we've talked about that I definitely want to talk about and expand on in the third segment because I think it relates to like trademarks of Cirques. So I want to move to the second segment, which is usually the quickest one of just giving kind of context to the audience, the listener of where Cirque was in his career, what he did right before this and right after. Noting that probably a lot of people who are listening to this might not have seen the before and after. I would say especially not the after
Yes.
film. So if we're going to segment two, what he does right before this, and it's actually released the same year, but the way old Hollywood worked was that people were just pumping out movies. So they're both released 1956, but this is right before he did There's Always Tomorrow. So this one is in black and white. And I pulled that information out specifically because the films that he did later on in his career, like from the '50s specifically, the ones that were in black and white, they were specifically in black and white because the studio was like, "We'll give you this project, you can do this, but we're not giving you the money to shoot it in color." So they didn't fully believe in it, and they didn't believe specifically in Barbara Stanwyck's power to attract an audience in that point in her career, which to me is an insane thing as a huge Stanwyck fan. I'm like, "This is Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray. What are we doing here?"
Yeah. So it's like, oh, okay, this is 10 years after Double Indemnity, so
Mhm,
they're
mhm.
not they don't have the same draw or whatever, right?
Essentially, and they put it specifically on Barbara Stanwyck. They're like, "Oh, she's old
Of
now."
course. Yeah, of course, of course. And even though it has a sort of Hays Code approved ending where, like, I haven't seen this one in a while, but they don't get together, and Fred
Mhm.
McMurray, like, returns to his family, but they have such an intense, like, emotional affair. Do you think maybe that's why too, that they were, like, less comfortable with it?
Um, Maybe.
Maybe.
I I think there's part of that the story also they were uncomfortable with, but I also feel like Cirque was like, "Well, they're not paying attention as much to what I'm doing
Yeah.
because they've kinda left me to my own devices so I can do what I wanna do." The same way like Tarnished Angels, which is also in black and white, and the only reason why it's in black and white is because the studio was like, "I'm not giving you money for color," and it has a darker element to that story, and it doesn't have the happy ending, without giving things away to people who haven't seen it. Where Cirque was able to just be like, "Well, they're not really watching me as much as they would with, this or Magnificent Obsession, All That Heaven Allows." So he had more leeway to do it, but I think There's Always Tomorrow is very in line with something like an All That Heaven Allows. It's kind of essentially the same story with the flip like, the script, like, a little flipped where it's, like, more about the man. And then what he does right after Written on the Wind is Battle Hymn, and this is a war, film, and it's based on the real life of a lieutenant from the United States Air Force, during the Korean War,
Mhm.
And the reason why this lieutenant was known was because he essentially helped a bunch of war orphans get to safety. So this stars Rock Hudson and Dan Dorea, who I'm fans of both of them. Originally, the studio wanted Mitchum to play the colonel, but the real Colonel Hess was an advisor on the film, and he was like, "Well, that guy's been in jail for smoking weed, so I don't want him to
Yeah,
play me."
yeah. He's too cool to play.
Essentially, but then like later, he was like, "Well, he wanted Rock Hudson." Probably because he had seen Rock Hudson in Sirk films, but then he was like, "Well, I didn't know he was gay at the
Yeah.
time." This is not the first war film he did, and it's not the last, because we briefly mentioned A Time to Love and A Time to Die, which is more closely in line to the type of war film that he would have done. He explicitly, and I've given more in-depth info on previous episodes, but like Cliff Notes version would be that he was a German director. He started his career in theater, moved to film. Obviously the Nazi Party was in the rise at the time. He didn't leave Germany until 1940, which was late for a lot of artists at the time. The only reason why he didn't leave earlier than that was because previously he was married and had a child. They got divorced, and the ex-wife ma put their son into the Nazi Party and refused Douglas,
Yes.
permission to see him because he was extremely leftist, and then he ended up eventually remarrying a Jewish woman, and then also the Nazi Party had revoked his passport, so it was very hard for him to leave Germany. He tricked his way out of there and eventually made his way to America, but he didn't like high violence stories. So any sort of war or western that he directed was low violence, and it was more so about the characters. You see that in this one, and you see that in A Time to Live and Die. I bring that one up as an importance because he thinks of that as sort of his love letter to his son, who ended up dying as a Nazi, unfortunately. Battle Hymn is different. It's very much an American story, and he didn't like it too much. He
Yeah.
thought that Rock Hudson wasn't probably the best actor for it. He thought that Robert Stack would have been a lot better, but the studio and the guy wanted Rock Hudson. He thought that Stack would have had given the character more nuanced and made him seem less like a hero. And he thought it was also his fault that he didn't push Hudson into being more nuanced in the film. But I think it's interesting to bring this film up because when we talk about Cirque, people don't ever think that they don't think about these type of movies, and they're like, "Oh, he made war movies, he made westerns." They don't know about it, which is fair. If you're newer to his work, you would know the big hits. But he was a very well-versed director, and he did a lot of genres. But like a war film and westerns are also melodramas in their own way,
Yeah.
in their own right. So I know you've seen both of them. We don't need to go super in depth on them, but like just how you feel about where he was in his career and how all three of those movies are super different and still portray his ability as an artist.
You're definitely right about like how they're not the Cirque films that would come to mind, because I think, as the case with any director, but especially old Hollywood, because the studio system, and I mean like studio system old Hollywood, because they're making
Mhm.
so many movies, most of these great directors have hundreds of movies. Well, not maybe not hundreds literally, but a lot of movies that very few cinephiles even would have gone through and seen, right? Like you think about somebody like John Ford and John Ford, so inevitably what happens is that the famous movies, people sort of coalesce around those, and that's what becomes indicative of the director. So John Ford,
Mhm.
think about westerns, right? And of course, why wouldn't they? But John Ford made basically every type of genre movie,
Yep.
including weepy melodramas, including war films, including comedies. He made a frickin' Shirley Temple movie. Like, he made so much stuff, right? And Douglas Sirk as well. And there's a before watching Battle Hymn and A Time to Love and A Time to Die, I had really only seen the ones that people remember him for, which are
Yep.
the melodramas. Um, and uh, and then I had also seen Lured, which is an
Uh-huh.
earlier film from him from the 40s, which is maybe more of like a um, noir, I guess.
Nora. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so it makes perfect sense that people, when they think about Cirque, they think about basically All That Heaven Allows, Written on the Wind, Imitation of Life, maybe Magnificent Obsession, maybe There's Always Tomorrow. There's Always Tomorrow fits really well into those films.
Uh-huh.
Really just feels like an extension of the sort of things he was making. Battle Hymn is very different. And while I would say I enjoyed watching it, I do think it's really corny in the way that a lot of people might find his other more acclaimed films corny. The difference is that the emotions in this movie, as big as they are and as raw as they are sometimes, they do feel a little bit forced. And it is because it's this real life guy. It is like this like
Mhm.
hagiographic sort of puff piece basically. And then it turns out the actual guy is like there are all these other people involved in the orphan retrieval. Like it's not just this
Yeah.
guy, right? But it's this very simplistic American war film. One of the very relatively few about the Korean War. Um and there's really not it's I would not say it's one of his better movies. And I do think you're totally right about that. That makes sense. Like Rock Hudson is really maybe not the right guy because he is so dreamy and hunky and he's this like all-star American like
Mhm.
quarterback looking guy, even though he was gay and in the closet, people didn't know that necessarily at the time. So he represented this kind of like very kind of I don't know, poster boy, all-American, you know, heteronormative kind of idol for, movie star idol. And so in him in the role, it really just feels like this is the greatest soldier in the world, from the greatest army in the world, the greatest country in the world. And we were over in Korea just to make a difference. We were helping out orphans. We were doing, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, whatever. And then you take something like A Time to Love and A Time to Die, which, as you mentioned, because of his connection to Germany and his son who died in the German army in World War II, like it's obviously way more personal. And I brought that up to my parents' place in Thanksgiving, and we watched it. We were watching a
Oh,
lot of
wow.
my mom likes horror movies, and then my dad was like, "I cannot do no more horror movies. Please, let's watch something else." And I thought, "Okay, I got the perfect thing for you because I have to do this homework, and he likes horror movies and all this stuff."
Oh,
So
that's good.
yeah, so we watched it and we were all really really impressed. Like I do think like all war movies, it does have its problems. Uh
Uh-huh.
Not in the same way as Battle Hymn, which I feel like is like very, very much playing into this sort of myth of American warfare, um,
Yep.
and American like supremacy. A Time to Love and A Time to Die does sort of have this wishful thinking, I think, a little bit, about the German army, the Wehrmacht, or however you say it, right? That they were not necessarily complicit in a lot of the Nazi crimes. And I'm sure to some degree there's accuracy to that. I'm not a historian. I don't know,
Mhm.
but it's a very compassionate film and it's very melodramatic and the
Mhm.
structure is like to die for, right? Because you're starting out on the Eastern Front in like Siberia, and like the German army's miserable. They're being forced to like shoot captive prisoners, and it's just awful. And then the main guy, who's John Gavin, right?
Mhm.
The boyfriend in Psycho, uh, and later ambassador to Mexico, which I thought was funny because he was like friends with Ronald Reagan. Um,
Oh, okay.
he's like real hunky, and he gets to go on furlough, and falls in love with a German woman, and then inevitably has to go back to war. And basically, as soon as he goes back, he tries to do the right thing. He tries to let people let some prisoners off the hook, and he gets killed for it. And it's tragic, and it's filled with all of these beautiful moments. I know it's one of his beloved movies, but I do think it's kind of maybe not as accessible,
Mhm.
to find maybe. So it feels like it's a little underrated. So if you're gonna watch one that is maybe not, included in his kind of like classic starter pack of American melodramas, I would definitely suggest A Time to Love and A Time to Die.
No, I 100% agree. I also love that you called it the American Starter Pack because I say that with love.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to describe his other films. I'll say to add on to it because you already described it perfectly is that if you like The Ascent, the beginning of this movie feels like it 100% influenced The Ascent in a sort of way. And if Sirk wasn't such a hopeful human being, I think that he could have made a darker film like The Ascent, because it starts off very dark to the point where I was like, "Whoa,"
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't expecting him. But then he goes the Sirkian route where he was like, especially when if you're watching this with no frame of reference to his life, which most people would not have, and I don't expect anyone to have, you're just like, "Oh, okay, whatever." But when you know about his son and why he wanted to make this, it actually made me really sad watching the movie.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
was like, "Oh, no." You could feel the hope that he had, but he also is a realist where he's like, "I who knows? His son probably might have been because he was thrown into it by his mother as a young age
Yeah.
to be a Nazi that he probably fully believed in this, but he's like, I don't know, and I would like to his memory in my mind to be let that he had some sort of
Yeah.
different mindset. So it's interesting to see what Serg is known for versus what the other films that he made. We've talked a lot about a lot of Sirkian elements and trademarks, getting into like the third segment briefly, because I feel like we've talked probably a lot of them already, but one that I want to mention, and I'll pass it off to you for any that we missed. One that I want to talk about specifically is the male ego in Cirque films. I think it's on high display in this film,
Oh, yeah.
uh, between Kyle and Mitch. And I think the cinematography plays well with this. And this shout out to Russell Meddy, who is a cinematographer on this and a lot of his films, who I love and have mentioned quite a bit in the series. And shout out to Frank Skinner, who we've already mentioned, who's the composer on that. But Cirque's exploration of the male ego, it's very on the nose here. Kyle thinks he's less of a man because he thinks in his one mind, and his one duty is to pass on his name, and he thinks he can't do that. And he views Mitch as a threat because he thinks that he's a man who can pass on whatever name he has, and he knows that his father prefers him to him. It's interesting to see a man at the time comment on this type of masculinity without making men seem pathetic. I think he's like, these are emotions that are valid and heightened emotions, and they're melodramatic emotions, but they're still valid emotions that, hey, if he's Kyle, someone who wants to have a kid and he thinks he can't, I don't think it's wrong of him to be sad about it. He takes it to another level,
Yeah.
obviously. But hey, I don't think that's out of the question. There's probably a lot of people who do that who go turn to drinking. I think there's probably more than we would think. So what your thoughts uh are on Cirque's exploration of the male ego in this film and probably touching on how he does it in his other films.
Yes. Yeah, well, definitely in this movie, like there is this central relationship between Mitch and Kyle, which is like founded on love. One has to assume initially when they were children, this formative relationship, but that has, as they've grown older and life gets more complicated and more complex, it's the relationship has become more complex where they're like, initially it's something as simple as like we're like brothers, right? But then as that grows older and you get invested, like, literally in the family business. And, Mitch basically, his entire life is in service of this family, without actually necessarily being directly a part of it. That it creates all these complications and all these fractured egos and areas for jealousy, cause for jealousy. And Kyle feels like he's the black sheep, or like he's the bad son, is jealous of Mitch for the love that and trust and respect that his father gives to Mitch, that maybe he doesn't get, but also maybe he doesn't deserve, um, and or at least like he feels like he doesn't deserve, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just this like self-perpetuating cycle, that is so sad, and that I think is so classically uh male ego driven. This like Ouroboros of like self-pity and and ego. All that heaven allows, I don't think really has that in the same way, because it the focus is more on women characters,
Mm-hmm.
Jane Wyman especially, and a lot of the toxicity in that movie comes from her friends, her society around them. But her son, um, she's got a son and a daughter. The daughter is much more understanding and comes around at the end, but the son is also driven by ego, I think, because the father is dead and the son is tried to, is the man of the house, whatever, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
and he is so concerned with the family legacy, and that he feels comfortable making these life decisions for his mom, and running the household in the way that he thinks that she can't because of his own ego. Yeah, so I think that that's definitely something that a preoccupation of Sirk.
I think so too. I think you put it perfectly. I do want to ask, do you have any things that we haven't brought up that you wanted before I ask you the double bill question?
Um, two quick things. So there's a great scene where Mary Lee and Kyle, really the only scene where they are like together alone, I think, where it's this just creepy, devious little sibling, fiendish sibling little talk,
Mm-hmm.
where they're watching they're watching Mitch and Lucy drive off, and Mary Lee is implanting this idea into Kyle's head that they're having this affair, and this
Mm-hmm.
idea that she's made up, that maybe she believes, maybe she doesn't, but is born out of her own jealousy and her own insecurity, and she's passing that on to Kyle in this sort of like the way that families do. You just trade off your insecurity
Mm-hmm.
to each other, and Kyle's really gets really upset, and that's when he splashes the drink in the mirror, which is such a great shot. But it has that great line, um, that I think is so like John Waters in particular, where she tells Kyle that she thinks they're having an affair, and Kyle says, "You're a filthy liar," and she says, "I'm filthy, period." So funny, and almost so modern too. Like,
It's
I know
so good.
the way people say that, yeah. And that just feels like you can hear Divine saying that, right?
Yes,
Like, she probably
absolutely.
does actually say that at some point. "I'm filthy." Uh, anyway, and then, of course, basically the final scene, or the penultimate scene at the courthouse, um,
Mm.
where they're just going in it and being like, "Did you hear Mitch say he wanted to kill him?" "Yes." Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you get to Dorothy Malone's scene, and this is like her Oscar moment, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
this whole world of emotions on her face, that she's just going through everything, and at first she is lying, she is punishing Mitch after years of not being not returning her love, because he's gay, or because or because he loves Lucy and wants to go to Iran, whatever it
Yeah.
is, uh
Whatever she wants to
whatever
think,
she wants, yeah. So she's punishing him, and then she's looking at him, and he's looking at her, and there's this great reverse shot of them looking at each other, and
Mm-hmm.
she's going through all of these emotions, and they're expressed on her face, not subtly. There's nothing subtle about these movies, really.
Mm-hmm.
um, necessarily. But it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful moment. And when she decides to tell the truth, you know, this look she has, um, complemented by Rock Hudson, sort of this realization that everything's gonna be okay and that, he does have a love for her in a way. Um,
Yeah.
it's just never gonna be the love that she needs or she wants. And she says at the end about Kyle, he was sad, the saddest of us all. He needed so much and had so little. And that's a great ironic line as well because, he has everything in the world. He has the
Yeah.
as he's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. But, you know, that doesn't account for happiness. That doesn't account for character, um, or for, sanity, right?
Uh-huh.
You know, he does need so much. He's like a sponge, and he needs somebody like Mitch to constantly, like, feed off of. And when the rift in that relationship builds to the point where, they can't be friends anymore, where he says, "Get out of this house or I'll kill you." He
Yeah.
basically has nothing left. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway.
I mean, I think that's a great other trademark of Sirk's. Just quickly put that I don't know if it was like an animosity towards the rich, but as someone himself who did not grow up rich and didn't really make that much money while he was a theater director or a film director, and he's always kind of struggling and really he doesn't make that many films after this because people just didn't wanna hire him, and he just eventually retired in Europe, and he was like, "Well, that's that's it." You can feel that he knows that the rich have their problems, and is interested into discussing what their problems are, but, he's more on the side of Mitch. He's more along those lines, and he could have a whole other podcast about Mitch and his father because we didn't really mention that, how we get scenes with him and his father, but
Very, very stark contrast, yeah.
I think it's interesting to have that in the film, so, that's another great trademark of Cirque's. My last question for you
Hmm.
is, if you're making a double bill, and you wanna show Written on the Wind to someone, but you're like, "I wanna pair this with something else," and make a net out of it. If you have one or multiple films, what film or films would you pair this with and why?
Yes, so there are many, many films you could pair this with.
Uh-huh.
You could if you really wanted to just show somebody who Douglas Sirk is, and I'm sure a lot of people do this, you could just do All That Heaven Allows in this movie, and that
Uh-huh.
would be order too. I think chronological makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Uh, all of those filmmakers we've talked about, you could
Uh-huh.
pair this with one of their works. You could pair this with Fassbinder or Todd Haynes or John Waters or Motivar or David Lynch. Um, but I think I didn't talk about Peyton Place. I've never seen Peyton Place, but I know that's also like a kind of a modern soap opera, style film from the 50s or 60s. I'll get around to that at some point. Okay, but I think, if you're gonna pair it with something, maybe it makes sense not to pair it with, like, a film that it inspires from the, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. Like, I mean, you could pair this with Blue Velvet if you wanted to, but that'd be interesting. But I think pairing it with something that was its contemporary is also interesting, and I would choose, Bigger Than Life, the Nicholas Ray movie, one of my, favorite movies, and is also about the, kind of dark heart of the American family, the absolute implosion of the American family, but on a much more intimate scale. Whereas I think this film is largely about capitalism and about male fragility and about, and about family in maybe in a more macro sense. Bigger Than Life is like a very intimate horror film about, what happens when in the 1950s nuclear family that is very paternalistic and run by the father figure. What happens when that father figure goes absolutely insane because he gets addicted to drugs and tries to like kill you? Like, what happens if your
Yeah.
dad goes insane because of back pain medication and tries to kill you? Which is like, not to be like crass or whatever, but that feels like something that happens a lot today.
I know.
That
Oh
something
gosh.
awful happens to your dad and he gets hooked on oxy and tries to strangle you or something. Like this, so, and I love this movie. I love Nicholas Ray. I
Same.
think Nicholas Ray's very much on that similar level to Douglas Sirk. Um, and I know you love old Hollywood actors, and I know like your main love is like uh oh
Burt
my
Lancaster.
yeah, Burt Lancaster. Yeah. I was trying to think if I could do a Burt Lancaster impression, but I can't really do one. I was I was trying to go back and think of what's a good line, but I can't really do one. Nor can I really do a James Mason. But
I also love James Mason.
I
He
know.
also has a very particular way of
Yeah, he
speech.
does. I watched Murder by Decree recently, which is
Mm.
Sherlock Holmes movie from the Canadian director Bob Clark. And
Oh.
he plays Dr. Watson in it. And he's kind of like an older, fumbling Dr. Watson. But there's a line in it where he's eating peas and he's trying to stab a single pea with a fork. And Sherlock Holmes, who's played by Christopher Plummer, is like, "What are you doing?" And James Mason says, like, "Oh, I can't do it. This is embarrassing. I can't do it."
I can't do
He's,
impressions, so whatever
he's,
you do
he's
is
like,
better than
he's
what
like,
I could do.
"I'm trying to corner the pea on my plate." Like, he doesn't sound like that. You know what he sounds like that.
I
It,
know. I could
anyway,
hear it.
so yeah. The, Yeah, we had good times, didn't we, Lo? So he's trying to, anyway, whatever. Bigger than life. Um, James Mason, one of the great James Mason performances, because there is this inherent menace in him a lot. Like, obviously, that is used really well in
Mhm.
something like Lolita, where you're like,
Yeah.
okay, this guy is fucking weird, right? There's something
Mhm.
gotta be something wrong with this guy. In this one, like, he's just a like a volcano. It's incredible.
Yeah, genuinely cannot go wrong with that double feature as someone who's also a Nick Gray fan and James Mason. I honestly feel like I should only give you time for your double feature because that's the best one, but the one that I picked, I kind of lean more on the camp feature of the film because I think this is Sirk's one of Sirk's more camp.
Mhm.
A lot of his other films, like, I think, are more on the melodrama of there's different levels of melodrama that I'm sure we talked about, but, this is the more camp one. I picked one that was the hagsploitation era of film of the '60s, and I didn't wanna pick the more obvious one, which was Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I recently watched Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice, which
Oh,
stars,
yeah.
um a lot of great actresses that were, like, older at the time, and I think that it's very Sirkian, but it's amping up the level of melodrama. So when people think of camp and when they're thinking of melodrama in a negative way, I think they're thinking of films like this, but Sirk's films are very much not like this. But whatever they're doing in this is explicit and it's on purpose and it's playing on these older actresses being in like horror or negative roles. And I love that film and I want to just give light to an exploitation film that's not Whatever Happened to Baby, which I love. I love that film, but Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice would be my pairing. But thank you, Ben, for joining me for Written on the Wind. I thought that was a fantastic conversation. You brought such great insights to the film, and I genuinely appreciate
Oh,
your
well,
time.
yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciated it. I would love to come back anytime you talk about anything. I will do my research. I will watch. It just gives me a great excuse to watch more movies, which I don't need an excuse for, but sometimes it's nice, to have
Mm-hmm.
organizing principle. Finally, I had the DVD of Time to Love and Time to Die sitting on my shelf for so long.
Perfect.
And I finally had a good excuse to watch it. So yeah, I appreciate it. I'd love to come back and thank you for inviting me. And yeah, listeners, if you want to hear me talk about the
Please.
Paranormal Activity franchise or some other bullshit, you can listen to the franchisees. And and you should watch the movie. I acted in my friend's movie. It's called Cherub. Uh
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when it's gonna come out, but at some point it'll be on the internet and you can rent it
Okay.
on the internet. So keep your eye out for that too.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia with intro music by Ingmar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. This is the last of the Sirk series. Thank you for listening to any of the episodes, and if you listen to all of them, fantastic. I love that. Stay tuned for our announcement of our next director in focus. And until then, watch more movies, and I'll catch you next time.